So we'll start off with a question for you today. Who was our drummer during the worship set? That was like a mystery, wasn't it? There's no drummer, yet the drums are magically appearing. Oh, that's wonderful. So give it up for Bailey, who's our worship leader. So he tried to find a drummer for this week, and some people were like, oh, I can't drum because I'm camping. Oh, I can't drum because I'm whatever. I can't drum because I just am not going to be bothered with that. And so Bailey was like, well, we don't have a drummer. I'm just going to do it my own self. He's just going to get out a drum. And we were kind of amazed when he pulled it out before first hour today and starts drumming at the same time he's playing and singing. Well done. Good illustration of using your gifts, your passions, full on toward God. Whatever opportunity is presented before me for how I can use my gifts in some way to serve God, I'll just do it no matter what it is. That's what we're going to be talking about today. Boldly, bravely, courageously running after God and using our gifts to serve Him. We're going to be using as a key illustration the idea of cliff diving into a large, hopefully large, body of water from the top of a big rock. Let's bring up that video right now. How many of us here have ever jumped off of a big rock into water? A few of us. All right, I'm impressed. How many of you, as you're watching this, are afraid of heights and are like, oh my goodness, that is something. Here's how it goes. I've done this a few times. I've only ever done it when I've been peer pressured into it. I've never gone, hey, that's what I want to go do. So, I get peer pressured into it. I look up at the big rock and I think, you know what? From down here at the bottom, it doesn't look all that high. And then you climb all the way up the big rock and you're there looking down at the water and you go, oh my goodness, what did I get myself into? It looks about 10 times higher, doesn't it? And now you've seen, you don't just do this. Don't go do this somewhere where you haven't seen anyone else do it first, okay? You've seen people jumping off this all day, and they jump off the cliff, they go into the water, they come up happy, smiling, yelling, they're just fine. But still, when you get to the edge, if you're me, you think, I know there's some rocks somewhere down there. Somewhere. Am I going to hit the good spot? Am I as talented or as physically adept as Liam and can get myself to the right place? Or am I going to kind of go off sideways and die in this jumping off the cliff? So you might not jump off the cliff because you're scared. That could be a reason to stay on top, right? Nod if you're with me, because you're scared. Another reason, usually I'm peer pressured into doing this when I'm on vacation, right? Another reason why you might not want to jump off the cliff is just because you're on vacation and you just want to sit around and do nothing, right? I don't want to go climb up the cliff and jump off and be all crazy. I just want to sit in my camping chair and just do nothing all day, okay? So laziness or fear, those are two reasons you might not want to jump off the cliff. Now, here's another really key point. This is very important for jumping off of a cliff. You do not want to jump off halfway. That is very bad. Don't do it. If you're going to jump, you either got to stay on top. You can stay on top. You can choose not to jump off of it. But if you're going to go, you got to go all the way. I was camping last week, and this was just in the pool, and one of my kids was jumping into the pool, my youngest, and he kept starting to jump, and then he'd hesitate and kind of turn himself around and half jump and catch himself with his arms. Oh my goodness, isn't that a scary feeling? You think he's going to crack his head open on the cement, right? Don't do that. If you're going to jump, you got to jump all the way. You can't do it halfway. It's no good to try and climb down that cliff and stay in control, right? If you're going to jump off the cliff, you have to release control and go the whole way. We mentioned earlier a verse, a key teaching of Jesus, where Jesus said this, whoever wants to save their life, whoever's trying to hold on to their life is going to lose it. But whoever loses their life for me, for him, for his sake, will save it, will find it. You can see that this is a truth. He is primarily teaching us something about spiritual reality. But this is a truth that permeates the universe God has made, isn't it? You can even see it in something like jumping off a cliff. If you try to hold on to your life, keep control of it, you're going to crash and tumble down the cliff and die. But if you go full on and give up control of your life, then you will find your life. What are people like when they come up out of that water? So happy and full of joy. Don't you want to be like that? The point of today's message is not that you need to go jump off a cliff into water, although that's not a bad thing to do, but we're going to use this as an illustration to talk about living boldly and using our gifts to follow after God. This is a theme that runs all the way through the Bible. You remember those Israelites way back in the olden days in the Bible? When God took them out of Egypt, you remember what he told them to do right before they left? He said, you're going to eat your last meal. And at that meal, I want you to eat it quickly, like you're about to run off somewhere. I want you to eat it with your shoes tied. You're ready to run. I want you to eat it with your robe tucked into your belt. You're ready to go. And he told them to repeat that meal again and again as they lived throughout their history so that they could remember that kind of heart attitude toward God. The attitude that says, whatever I got, I'm ready to use it all for you, God. We're in a series right now called Build More Fires. Build More Fires. We're talking about the fire of God. We're talking about the fire of God, which is his presence, a passion for him, an intensity, a devotion to him. It is his fire in our lives, which is expressed very differently among people who have different personalities. But it is his fire in our lives that does all the real work, that brings real power, that brings real meaning and joy to life, that makes your life like those guys coming up out of the water after they jumped off the cliff, full of excitement and energy. It's God's fire that does that. We're talking about the things we need to do in order to allow God to build the fire. We have to take action. Remember, we talked about the last couple of weeks, we talked about Jesus saying how the road is wide and broad that leads to destruction. But the road that leads to life is narrow. Only a few find it. You have to do something to find it. God does all the work. We could never have found it or gotten in on our own. We are forgiven and brought into a new life with God only because Jesus died on the cross for us. But that does not mean we don't have to take action. Oh, we do. We're going to see that today. We're going to look at a man of action. We're going to look at Paul, the apostle, this week. And next week, we'll be looking at a scene from later on in his life. We're going to look at his early life and his conversion today. Then we're going to jump into the last few weeks of our series will be in the book of Revelation, which is going to be very exciting. But we're looking at Paul today. The first 2 points for your notes, if you're here on site, these are the same points we've been looking at every week. Number 1, we need to build the fire. That's just what I've said. We need to do something. We need to take action so that God can build his fire up inside of us and make us into the people we were created to be. And then the second point is this: gather the people. Okay, we are Community of Hope Church. We are not a club. We are not just a social gathering. We are a group of people dedicated to a mission that was set in motion by the Lord Jesus Christ himself, and a mission that is taking over the world and will never end, will only always increase. We are part of that mission. What is that mission? We say it in a particular way here: helping people grow in their relationship with God and with each other. We're on that mission because that is the heart of God. That is what he is doing all the time, trying to bring people back to himself. We want to be part of that. So we want to gather people to God. But this whole series is about the fact it's essential we do that by his power. We can't gather people to him by our own strength. That will be useless. If they even follow, they won't be following God, they'll be following us. We need to have the fire of God burning brightly in us, and that, if God's fire and presence live among us in a powerful way, that would draw people to him automatically. It just will. There is nothing like God. compared to having God. Once you've experienced the taste of Him, hopefully I won't fall off this platform today. Once you've experienced the taste of God, there is nothing else that compares to that. Just like we sung about in this song, the whole world, everything that draws us about this life, sunny days in the beach will still be good, but there'll be nothing compared to knowing the one true God. So we want to build that fire. To build that fire, we got to live a life that is bold. And so we're going to look at Paul today. We're going to look at his life. I'm going to tell you a little bit about his background, his growing up experience. He is so much fun. I don't know if he would have been that much fun to be around. It would have been good for you to be around him, but he's so much fun to think about. And he is a great example. We're going to use him as an example today, but I want to give a little word of warning. We're going to use him as an example, but I am not saying that everyone has to be exactly like him in his personality or the kind of crazy, larger-than-life things that he does. What we're going to try and get out of his example is his heart toward God. And all of us need to have that heart, a heart of boldly using our gifts to pursue God, to run after Him. In our own way, the gifts God has given us and the personality God has given us. We're going to be able to see it really clearly in Paul because he is larger than life and he did some crazy stuff, okay? Now, so here's the background. Let's talk about him for a minute. So Paul, he was a Jewish man, first century, and he grew up in the city of Tarsus. Now, this city was not the center of everything. It also wasn't out in the middle of nowhere. It was kind of a middle-sized town in the Roman Empire. Now, at that time, you'll see when we get to the text that we're going to read today, his name was Saul. So don't be confused if I say Saul and Paul and go back and forth a little bit. That's all the same guy that we're talking about today. So he grew up in this town, and his family were actually key people in that city of Tarsus. They owned a very large business. They were probably very wealthy. They owned a business making tents. Tents was big business back then, just like tenting is big business right now, isn't it? Everybody wants to go camping because there's nothing else to do, right? Get your tent or your motorhome. That's even better. But Paul didn't build motorhomes. He built tents. So, back on track. Paul grew up in the city of Tarsus. He's got this family. They're devout followers of God, Jewish family. Paul was a very talented young man as well. As he grew up, he found that he was very good at reading, at writing, at studying, at leading other people, at teaching. And so, growing up in this devout family, I think that he thought a few things about his life. He thought, number one, I want to be a man of God. Whatever I do in my life, I want to be a man who makes my family proud and who pursues God, because God is really the most important thing in life. Number two, I think he thought, I'm supposed to be a leader. And number three, he thought, I'm supposed to be a teacher. He could see that based on his gifts. And so, Paul sat around and did nothing. No, that's the opposite of what he did. He went nuts pursuing that. He didn't hesitate. We don't know all the details of his experience growing up, but it's clear that he went full on after this vision of his own life that he thought was coming. Because the first time we meet Paul, he's not in Tarsus, is he? Those of you who know the story, he's not in this middle-sized town. He's now, the first time we meet him, he's a young man. He's approximately contemporary to Jesus. He's a young man. He's in the city of Jerusalem. This is the center. This is the big time. And he is being taught by the most famous teacher in the Jewish world at that time. He has obviously excelled over and over again, and he has risen. He is rising beyond all of his peers. He is going after this vision of his life full on. That's where we first find him. Now, the problem with going after things full on like that is that human beings often get it wrong, don't we? We often get things wrong. And so, very quickly, we find Paul going 100 miles an hour, 200 kilometers an hour in exactly the wrong direction. Because here's what happens. He hears about this Jesus that people are saying came back to life from the dead. He hears about that. He hears about more and more Jewish people who are saying, Jesus is the Messiah. He's the one that we need to follow. Everything is different now. And he thinks, that's no good. That's not true. They're making that up. And so he goes into full-on destroy the Christians mode. Just like he went full-on into this, I'm going to study and become this great teacher and leader, he goes full-on into destroy the Christians mode. He doesn't play around with this. In fact, what we're going to find when we read the text in a minute is that he is the most passionate about destroying the Christians of anyone. Even the people who stand to lose the most if the Christians succeed, right? The people who actually sentenced Jesus to death, the high priest, those guys who did the bad stuff, who you would think would be the most passionately against the church, Paul is more passionate than them. He wants to round up all the Christians he can, so he searches through the whole city of Jerusalem. And remember, fire gathers people, right? That's true of the fire of God. It's also true of human fire. And so Paul, being all passionate about this, people start following him. They jump on the bandwagon. This guy is going nuts about persecuting these Christians. That must be the right thing to do. Let's do it. They all start following him. So he's hunting out all the Christians in the city of Jerusalem. Finally, he runs out of them. He's like, man, there's no more Christians here for me to arrest and beat up and kill. That's terrible. I'm going to go find some more. So that's what we're going to find. He's gone to the leaders, the high priests, and he said, give me some Christians, help me, give me some letters so I can go into other cities and find the Christians there if there are any and hunt them down too, because we got to stamp this thing out. But here's the key in all of this. Paul is going full on. He's going full on the wrong way, but he is going full on for God. He thinks that what he's doing is for God. Now, he's full of all kinds of mixed things. He's full of pride. He is probably the least gentle person you're ever going to encounter at this point. He's very rough around the edges. But the key is that he is going full on for God. And that's key to why God is able to use him in the long run. So let's read through in Acts chapter 9 now. We're going to read the story of his conversion and how the fire of God shows up in his life and slams him into a brick wall and stops him dead in his tracks. Okay? Here we go. Remember Saul and Paul, same guy. Meanwhile, Saul was still breathing out murderous threats. How'd you like to be described as that? Breathing out murderous threats against the Lord's disciples. He went to the high priest. Notice the high priest doesn't come to him. He's begging the high priest to let him go arrest more Christians. He's that intense. And asked him for letters to the synagogues, that's like their churches, in Damascus. That's a town that was some distance away, a city. So that if he found any there who belonged to the way, that is the way of following Jesus, whether men or women, he might take them as prisoners to Jerusalem. So he gets special letters. Notice that he's fair about this, okay? He's not just going to arrest the men, he's going to arrest the women too. He is equal opportunity. As he neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice say to him, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? He responds to this voice and he says, who are you? Who are you, Lord? He recognizes this is God in some way, but who are you? The voice answers, I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. Now get up and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do. Let's read on. The men traveling with Saul stood there speechless because they heard the sound, but they did not see anyone. Saul got up from the ground, but when he opened his eyes, he could see nothing. He's blind. So they led him by the hand into Damascus. For 3 days he was blind and did not eat or drink anything. And after taking some food, he regained his strength. Saul spent several days with the disciples in Damascus, and watch this. At once, he began to preach in the synagogues that Jesus is the Son of God. This is an astonishing story. And I'll tell you what, it is astonishing and miraculous that God shows up in his life the way he did. But that's not the thing that shocks me the most about this story. God shows up in his life and blows up his whole life. I mean, where is Saul? His whole life at this point is directed on this mission that he's on, which he thinks is for God, to arrest all these Christians and stamp it out of existence. He wants this Christian movement to be completely destroyed. That's the whole mission of his life. God shuts it down completely. He shuts it down completely. He blinds Paul. He tells him to go into the city. Paul goes into the city. He spends a couple of days there. This other guy named Ananias is told to go heal him, told by God to go heal him. Ananias is scared to do it because Paul is nuts. He goes to Paul, heals him. Something falls out of his eyes. He can see again. What is the very next thing he does? This is amazing. He came to this city with the mission to arrest Christians, to persecute them, to beat them up, to take them back to Jerusalem, maybe to kill them. And in a span of 3 days, he turns his life 180. Here is a secret, here is a key to why Paul is able to be used by God so powerfully. It's not that he's always right. In fact, most of the time he's wrong. But whatever he does, he is prepared to do it full on for God. He is prepared. He's like those Israelites with his cloak tucked into his belt with his shoes on. He's got this heart attitude that says, whatever I think God is asking me to do, boom, I'm going after it with everything that I have. That is his heart. And it is stunning. Who could do this? What person could do this? Go from being a persecutor of Christians in 3 days to basically running out into the street screaming about Jesus being the Son of God. That's what he does. He runs out into, the synagogue is probably open air, at least part of it. He runs out into the streets and into their churches and just starts yelling about Jesus, telling people about him. Now, it's key here also, Paul is still on the wrong track. Is that the best way to get people, to gather people to God? Is the best way to teach people about Jesus to run out into the street screaming about Jesus and you're going to go to hell if you don't follow after Jesus? No. You guys can agree with me, right? That's not the best way. But that's the way that Paul thinks of first, and he immediately goes after it. It's like we said, I'm using this car illustration as well. It's like he's going 100 miles an hour, 200 kilometers an hour in the wrong direction. God slams him into a brick wall. He stops him. But what happens to many of us is we're on a pathway to destruction. We're on a highway to hell. We slam on the brakes, but then that's all we do. We just stay there. But that's not Paul at all. He slams on those brakes. He spins the wheel, and he immediately hammers the gas and goes 100 miles an hour in the other direction. This is the heart of a disciple. This is the heart of the kind of people God used throughout history, throughout the Bible. God used to do powerful things. People who were ready to go full on, use everything they had, boldly live for him, even if they got it wrong. So, 2 more points for you. If you're here on site, you're going to have these in your notes. The first point is this. Paul builds the fire of God in his own life, by taking action. Paul builds the fire by taking action. The fire of God will never burn brightly in you if you're only hearing about God, thinking about God, and you're not taking action to use the gifts that he's given you in whatever way you can think of to serve him. And the fire of God will be allowed to burn more and more brightly in you the more intensely you do that. This is the story of the earliest church over and over again in those early chapters of the book of Acts, which is what happened right after Jesus rose from the dead, died, rose from the dead, and they didn't see him anymore. Over and over, they experienced the presence of God. But there's also another word that's related to the word presence in New Testament Greek, and that is the word that we translate boldness. Every time the presence of God is there, it also, not every time, most times, it describes the followers of Jesus as bold, courageous, bravely, using every gift and everything they have to run after God. Paul builds the fire in his life by taking action. Now, the last point, the fourth point for your notes is this: God can redirect an object in motion. I said already that Paul, even when he turns around and decides to follow God, even after that experience of seeing the fire of God and realizing that Jesus is the one, he still doesn't end up going quite the right direction, does he? He goes out screaming on the streets. Well, that's actually not what God wanted him to do. How many people do you think became followers of Jesus after Paul went out screaming on the streets of Damascus? How many people do you think he converted, became followers of Jesus right after that? I'm pretty sure, the Bible doesn't say for sure, but I'm pretty sure it was 0. He went out screaming on the streets, and how did people react to him? They hated his guts. It says that he actually proved to them. He was super smart, right? This guy had just studied, he'd been studying at like Harvard, right? The Harvard of the ancient world. He was the best of the best, and he walks out there and he proves to them that they're wrong and he's right. And how do people react when you prove that they're wrong and you're right? They want to kill you. That's what happens. They're not convinced by that. People are only changed when you come into relationship with them. They're only changed by love, by God's power working through you in their lives. They're not changed by you arguing them into something. Just go on Facebook. You'll see it over and over again, right? So Paul goes out and he goes nuts in Damascus, and they want to kill him. So immediately Paul's friends are like, oh my goodness, we got to hide this guy. So they hide him. They drag him out of the streets. They're like, you cannot preach anymore. You got to go in the basement. Boom, they hide him. And then his enemies are actually all over the city trying to look for him to kill him. So they have to cut a hole in the city wall, knock the bricks out of it, and they actually put Paul in a basket, lower him out of the wall of the city so he's not murdered on the way out. This is how much people hated him. And they say, okay, now just go. Just run, buddy. That's your only chance. Paul goes out of the city of Damascus. His intense personality continues the whole rest of his life, by the way. He goes out of that city of Damascus, and I think his conversation with God went something like this. He said, all right, I'm out of Damascus. God, now I'm going to Jerusalem to yell at everybody about Jesus. And God said, no, you're not. No, you are not. You are an object in motion, Paul, and that's why I've chosen you, because you are ready to run after me with everything you got. But you got a long way to go. We got to knock some of those rough edges off. You got to go to the desert. And Paul's like, what? I hate the desert. I don't want to go to the desert. There's no people I can preach to in the desert. I can't write any books in the desert. I can't impress people in the desert. You got to go to the desert, Paul. Okay, for how long? Like a week? No. Like 3 years you got to go to the desert. This is going to take you a long time. So God sends him into the desert for 3 years and then puts Paul through a whole series of really difficult, trying events in his life to make him to shape him into the man that he's supposed to be so he can fulfill his mission. And guess what? His mission, he was right about it. He was right about it. He was called to be a man of God. He was called to be a great leader and a great teacher. God was eventually able to get him there, even though he kept going the wrong ways, because he was going full on. Because he was jumping off that cliff, not trying to climb down it halfway, hanging on to his own life, not hesitating at the edge. He was jumping off at full force. Let's turn to Acts chapter 20, and we're going to look at just one scene from the end of Paul's life to show you how God has changed him and is now able to use him. He's still just as intense, but now his personality, before he was intense like Jesus, following after God like Jesus, but he was full of pride, not like Jesus. He was full of anger. He was not gentle at all. In those ways, he was not like Jesus. He was not overflowing with love. He was overflowing with I'm right and you're wrong. But at the end of his life, We'll see him here. He's speaking to a church that he spent a lot of time with, the church of Ephesus, and this is the last time he's ever going to speak to them. And here's what he says. We'll read a few verses here. Paul sent to Ephesus for the elders of the church. When they arrived, he said to them, "You know how I lived the whole time I was with you. From the first day I came into the province of Asia, I served the Lord with great humility." This is where he's at now. "And with tears." It's going to be a theme. Paul cried a lot. This guy was something. "Although I was severely tested by the plots of the Jews." Yeah, they beat him with a whip like 39 times. "You know that I have not hesitated to preach anything that would be helpful to you." Notice now, he's not just screaming at people about Jesus. He's preaching things that he thinks and that God is directing him will be helpful to them. Oh, that's a big change from before. "I have not hesitated to teach anything that would be helpful to you, but have taught you publicly and from house to house." Wow, he's showing up at people's houses teaching them. "I have declared to both Jews and Greeks that they must turn to God in repentance and have faith in our Lord Jesus." And this last verse, let's go there. Yeah, this last verse is my favorite. He says this, "So be on your guard. Remember that for 3 years I never stopped warning each of you, night and day, with tears." Now, what we see here is the same intense personality, the same full-on for God, but now changed and shaped by Jesus. We saw earlier his intensity was he was going to go scream at people, prove that he was right and they were wrong. Now his intensity is he's going to weep and beg people with a heart overflowing with love and gutted at the thought that they might miss the salvation that is in Jesus. He's going to beg them with tears day and night to turn to God and follow after him with everything they have. Paul is so much fun to look at from a distance. I don't know if he would have been that much fun to be around. How would you guys react if I showed up at your house in the middle of the night weeping? Seriously, how would you react? This is what he says. He's house to house, day and night, with tears. He's begging them and warning them to flee from the wrath and run after God with everything they have. If I woke you up in the middle of the night at 3 a.m., busted into your living room, and was weeping on your floor, begging you to turn your life over more to Jesus, would you still come to Community of Hope Church? I don't know. It'd be pretty weird. You might call the police. This is what he does. This is what he does. This is why he had to move around a lot, I think. Nobody could handle him for very long. So what we're saying here is not, you must be just like Paul. I'm not saying that you need to run out to the desert for 3 years. I'm not saying that you need to run out into the streets screaming about Jesus. I'm not saying that you need to go to someone's house at 3 o'clock in the morning and weep in their living room and beg them to repent. But what we see in Paul, written in very large letters, we see a heart that's ready to run after God. That's what we see. A heart that's ready to use any gift that he's been given, everything that he is, to serve God in any way he can think of. There are no excuses here. He could have given so many excuses when God showed up and blinded him with fire. Well, I can't go preach today right in the street. I can't go tell these people. I was just the opposite. These guys were my old friends. They're not going to listen to me. He doesn't use any excuses. He doesn't let fear or laziness stop him from running full on after God. So let's come back to the image of the cliff, diving off into the water as we wrap up today. How can we apply this in our own lives? It's going to look different than in Paul's life. It's going to look different. You're on top of that cliff. I don't know where you're at. You could maybe think through this today or this week. Are you on top of the cliff? You haven't yet jumped? You're waiting, you're hesitating for some reason. You feel the draw or you feel peer pressure, good peer pressure to jump off that cliff into a new life in the water with God. But you're hesitating. You haven't done it yet. Or maybe you are half jumping. We're going to talk about this next week. That's the most dangerous place to be at, to half jump off that cliff. You kind of got your toe in the water with Jesus, or you're just hanging around church. You got a little bit of God. That's an okay place to start, but if you stop there, if you hang out there too long, if you try to climb down that cliff in your own strength, and you try to hang on to it too long, it's going to destroy you. Jesus warned about this over and over again. You have to go all the way in. Don't go halfway. Are you half jumping? Or are you maybe in midair right now? You ran off that cliff and you jumped. I hope that's where you're at. And you're not sure, maybe I'm going the wrong way. Maybe I jumped the wrong way. I'm not sure if I'm Liam or if I'm Pastor Isaac, and I'm maybe going to jump onto the rocks and crush myself. Wherever you're at today, be encouraged. If you've jumped off that cliff, God is able to redirect you midair. He is able to use that boldness that you have shown, willingness to follow Him, to put you in the right place. It might be difficult. It might take some time in the desert, but He's going to redirect you so that you land into that new life with Him. If you haven't yet jumped or you're half jumping, a couple of questions for you. These questions might help clarify what is the specific thing that you need to do. What would you do with your life? What would you do with your life if you were not afraid of anything? If you weren't afraid at all, if that were suddenly erased from your brain, your psyche, you weren't afraid at all of dying or of not having enough money or of people, what they would think about you, if all those things were erased completely, what would you do with your life? What is your deep passion, the things that God has made you for? And are you using them? Are you using those things, and are you using them for God? Maybe some of you are using them, but you're using them for your own plan, not for Him. Another question that might help you, what would you do with your life if you weren't lazy? Might sound a little harsh, but what would you do with your life if you weren't tired all the time? If you had energy all the time and you could just direct that anywhere you wanted to, what would you do with that energy and strength? What would you do if you were willing to climb up that rock and build yourself up and actually take the leap? Get in touch with who am I? Who did God make me to be? What are the gifts that He's given me? And am I using them full on for Him? Because if we use whatever those gifts and run after Him 100%, we will not end up in the wrong place. We're going to end up in that water, the true water, the good water. And you know what those people who went into the water look like? They come up out of the water full of joy. They're so excited. They're so happy that they jumped off the cliff. Their life is full of meaning. This is a metaphor for what life in Christ is really like. If you think you're really following after Jesus with everything you have, and your life seems kind of boring and dull, I got news for you. You're not actually following Jesus. Not the way that He wants you to be. Guaranteed. Life with Christ is full of life and fire. It's the life that is truly life. Let's pray, and we'll continue in worship.